Hello, my friends, and welcome to today's episode with the amazing Asha Ramakrishna. We had such a good conversation. It's a little bit on the longer side, not gonna lie. For those of you who are feeling like our current economic system, um, how we interact with money and value and transacting with each other and interacting with each other and trading with one another feels like it's a little bit outdated or not working. One, you're not alone. Two, this episode is for you. We talk about so much beautiful, deep aspects of how we show up in this world and how we interact with ourselves and one another, and how we can create a world that's a little bit more sustainable, where we can be planting seeds that then can have regenerative growth over time. Um, if you are somebody that has also been thinking about like maybe traveling to new places to find parts of yourself or parts of your experience with this world, or connect with other parts of this world, especially after the last few years of feeling like we couldn't really go very many places, I'm excited for you to hear this episode, because Asha talks about the incredible pilgrimages that she creates and encourages and invites people to step into this incredible space that she creates in ancient lands of sorts. And she calls it re-indigenizing people and experiences in our lives that allow us to really be able to connect with parts of ourselves that our current society has had us detach from, is so powerful and so important. So without further ado, I'm so excited for you to get to know Asha. Asha, welcome to Checkbox Other. I am so happy that you are here today. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, so see, I can already feel it. I'm like holding my body back so I don't get too excited right up front. I just want to open the floor for you to tell us a little bit about your journey. I always call it the Cliff Notes version of your journey, the ahas, the twists, the turns, maybe the surprises that led you to where you are today and what you're doing out in the world.
Yeah. So I am an immigrant of Venezuela, of Indian descent, and I am in Nipmuc territory in Harvard, Massachusetts, and I am the mother to two teenage spirited young women. And I have a partner of 20 some years, and my favorite daughter is probably like my Portuguese water dog, who's in the back hanging out with me, and she might come in and out. But how I, kind of arrived here is I came from Venezuela on my own to come to college to study molecular biology, because, which this part is so like a little bit sad, because my father's an agronomist, and I came with the dream that, oh my God, makes me emotional. I came with the dream that seeds could be available to all humans.
Mm-hmm.
And that we could actually solve hunger in the world. And that is really the reason why I studied what I studied, because that was what was driving me. And along the journey, of course, I discovered that Monsanto is not what I thought they were. They didn't care about the things that I thought they cared about. And also, here I am, an immigrant studying, oldest of five. Like, you do the thing so that you can also help your family. And then along the ways, I met this like amazing human who I've been partnered with for over 20 years. And I was the primary kale winner. And in that, I realized my daughters were very young. I realized that what I was doing was not actually helping me be the mother that I wanted to be.
Yeah.
And that is not a statement to demonize an industry, or to demonize, a job or anything like that. It's more that it was a moment in my life where I could feel that this institution was not actually supporting my human.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important job that I felt that I had which was to be present to these little girls. And I told my partner, and you can imagine his like, what? When I said, I'm going to leave this job. And he was like, what are you doing? Like at that time, I was like 90% of our income was coming from me. Right. And I was like, I don't know, but it's something that's taking over me. And it really was, it was taking over me. There was like no unfeeling any of that. And I had that conversation. We fought for like a month straight of like, why are you doing this to our dreams? And I just was like, I can't unsay this. And I then had the company that I was working for, within 4 months, if that, laid me off and gave me a severance package of like 6 months and executive coaching. And I was like, oh my God, right? Like, here I am in this. What is this? Right? Yeah. Thank you, universe. And so then fast forward, well, right then, like a couple months before, I had started putting together this class, and it was called Reclaiming Your Power. And of course, this was like this, I was in that stage in my life where I was really teaching the thing that I needed to learn. Like it's a little different now. But we all go through those phases, right? Where we teach the thing that we need to learn. And that was what I was like in conversation with in my life, with my soul. And so I did this course. I had like 20 people sign up. And this was like in the era of like emails. Okay. There was no social media. There was like, I remember I had like a podcast on like Block Talk Radio or something like that. Yeah, you remember
Instead
that?
Instead of everyone having one everywhere now. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had that. And then I had like emails. And I would just, sent out emails and said, invite the people, right? Wow. And so I did about 5 rounds of this class. And by the 5th round, I started having this very visceral experience to what our stories as women and femmes. I started falling in love with whatever, like our stories and the reclamation of those stories. Yeah. And so I started writing this book, which was my first book, The Priestess Code, Awakening the Modern Woman. I started writing the book and I started doing all these interviews with women. And while I was in this phase in my life, one day, afternoon, right before picking up the kids from preschool or whatever, I was taking a shower and I heard, hold these principles to be truth and to live by. And I like, really, my head was like, what? Like, oh, okay. Where is this coming from? I have never heard voices like, but this is good. Like, this shit is good. I don't know where it's coming from, but it's good. So I was like, hold, please.
I'm listening.
Don't go fast. I cannot write this down right now. And so I grabbed a towel, like, jetted out of the shower, water dripping everywhere. But I went and grabbed my notebook, and I still remember this notebook, and I just wrote down what I heard. And I was like, holy shit. And I looked at them, and I remember saying, like, these are really nice. Mm-hmm. But I don't live this way. And so as much as I felt like, oh my God, I had the Edgar Tolle moment of, or the Buddha moment where spirit life comes and tells you the revelation, right, of your walk. As much as I was like, wow, I had that experience, I also knew that it was really for me. Yeah. Like this really wasn't about anybody else except for me. And so I really took that to heart. Mm-hmm. I really took that as a chance and an opportunity for me to explore what these principles were bringing to me. And what I now, because I couldn't really tell who was this that was speaking to me, but I do know that the thing or the essence, the energetics that I was in like constant inquiry over, because I was really struggling to be a mom, was the Great Mother. And so I can't tell you that these came from the Great Mother, but I can tell you that what I feel from these principles is that they have a very much of a moon principle wisdom to them, and also earth principles to them, which some people would call, as I think your work is, like the feminine, right? But I'm also like moving away from like, well, what would it mean for me not to be in binaries,
Right.
and for me to like really connect to like the synthesis and the essence of these principles. And I believe that these principles came to me anyway, because I needed to balance out my very solar, very active, very moving, very achieve part of myself. And they came in to really kind of balance me. And they've been my forever invitation for myself and for others, and a real foundation to my work. So maybe that wasn't like cliff notes of my story, but there you go.
Do you mind, since it flowed right through, do you mind saying one more time what came to you?
The principles?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can read them to you. So the very first one is, you are a seasonal being, accept it. And literally that one took me 2 years to be like, what is that? Like, what does that mean? I don't understand.
Like digest it fully, or like, I get it intellectually, but
I don't think I did. I actually don't think at that time I did not understand it intellectually. I rejected it actually, because I felt like that doesn't make sense. That is not, I mean, sure, trees have that,
right.
But me, I can't afford that.
Yeah.
Like that's, and that's kind of like a little bit of like, maybe a little bit of like the immigrant story. I can't afford to have a winter. What are you talking about?
Yeah, that's nice.
So
yeah.
that's
nice for other people. That's not a reality for me. Yeah.
Right.
And I mean, the other part is not only the individual processing of the world, but the world around you, the traditional world around you isn't created for seasons. Crazy. I mean, the part that is a little bit mind-blowing though is when you're going through formalized education, there is a seasonality to it. But once you step into adulthood where you're supposedly done, which is not the case, you lose that. You're expected to just become the robot that operates the same no matter what the day is. And so it is really, I mean, it makes a lot of sense that it would kind of malfunction a little bit as you're like, I understand, I've seen it happen outside of myself, and probably parts of my life have been that way, but one, survival, I can't do that. And two, that's not how the world around me is set up for me to be able to thrive, or at least just, survive survive within the confines of how I love how you called it the kale winner.
Yeah. No, right. And I mean, I'll definitely say like, that's a trauma response, right? For me to say, I have no idea what that looks like. And it was this inquiry of like, what does that look like? And so the next kind of principles, I think, as much as like I spent time in that principle, I think the other ones also helped me to walk this. And so let me read what the other ones are. Deconstruct and construct it is your nature. Talk about Shakti, right? Talk about rebirth. You are here to be the highest form of who you are, nothing else. Love that. Compare yourself to no other. You are here to connect. No, let me see something about sisterhood. That was the one that I was like, why are you bringing me this? So the principle is connect to a sisterhood. It will strengthen you. And that is definitely one of the ones that I was like, I don't want to do that. And, I've healed a lot from that. Okay. The next one is permission is no longer needed. You're here to create with free will, expand this awareness. And then finally, your needs and soul wants are provided. even before you need or want them, embody this intention.
Oof.
Yeah.
The amount of trust in that
I know.
is beautiful, and also makes so much sense that there would be such a rejection in protection, right? Of like, but the world hasn't made those things safe for me. I mean, I love the idea and the download of it, but also like I don't want to have myself thinking that and then the world be like, nice, that's sweet and wonderful, but this is the reality. And so I love so very much. There's so many pieces of what you just talked about that I think are really powerful. One, I actually call them shower thoughts for myself, because I find that, and there's science behind that, which I'm sure you're aware of too, but like the power of falling water and the ability to be outside of just the go of every day, and the shampooing of your hair and stimulating your scalp, all of that, how there was so much activated in the physical sense that gave way for and room for this to come through. But then also, it's really, really fascinating how those things feel like, I don't know about those listening, but like my body was nodding in agreement, not just my head, my whole body was just like expanding and being like, yes, that had such like a visceral reaction that was like, this is my mind. Yep. My mind probably has reactions, but my body was like, yes, it's like drinking water. Didn't realize I was thirsty for that. And there's just so much power in the universality of it, I think, because especially as we the word sisterhood, I love that you had that kind of reaction, because I too grew up in very masculine spaces. And I will never forget, I read this book called Text Me When You Get Home. And there was a whole section about how women in particular are conditioned to this kind of Disney princess striving for the prince in all aspects of our lives, that we're, there's only one of us that can get there, so we can't trust each other. And, the whole idea of there is competition around every corner makes it really, really difficult to tap into what is so very evident. We are, as human beings, intended to be able to kind of come together and support one another. We're not supposed to be in these kind of isolated solo lives. But it is really difficult when your body's saying yes and your mind is saying no, to create the kind of grace and space to absorb that. So I feel like I hope those that are listening go back and listen to those again, because my body my mind loved it, right? But my body couldn't control itself as you were saying that stuff. So that's absolutely wonderful. And I can only imagine what happened for you as you were like, I was just in the shower. All this just came. Okay, all right, let's get this down.
I mean, they became my teachings, right? Or I became the student to these principles, right? And to go back to what you said about the sisterhood thing, like it's not just the mind that says, it's also like our experiences, it's our past, it's our DNA, it's our past lives. We've all had these like really tough experiences with other human beings, especially other women. And so there is much, much beauty and surrender and support. And also there's a ton for us to heal also within ourselves and like with each other, So I just like, I get it. I mean, I get it. And I'm in this year where I'm in these amazing partnerships, both because I'm doing some retreats in Spanish with my childhood friend. Her name is Michelle Vadillo. And it's like such an easy, sweet partnership. And I'm writing this book, your soul map, with AC Brown, and it's such a sweet and easy partnership. And I'm just like, I mean, I'm saying this because I'm telling you that I did not have this sweetness before.
Yeah. And the ease it feels, even just the way it's like the way it's coming out of your mouth as you're talking about it is like smooth, like a song. Like the ease that it comes forth with when it's able to exist in space, right? That
and it's precious.
Yeah. And it's not like you're resisting. It's not like I always talk about like a lot of our lives we're like pulled the emergency brake and still trying to go forward. It's not that you're operating with all this resistance and burnt rubber, right? It's this like, oh, I could put that down and look at what's allowed here when I give that space, and look at the beauty that not only shows up in me, but shows up in other people and the potential of the things we create. I love this year for you because I feel like it's something that so many of us are trying to grapple with as we try to figure out how our reentry to interacting with people is, especially people we don't know and strangers.
Yeah.
How are we willing to take what we've learned about ourselves, about the world, about what safety really is, and our own kind of free will, and how we create spaces that feel like we're willing to accept other people in our spaces and allow for that ease, instead of it being, I feel like our culture right now talks about boundaries in a way that means that you shut everybody out, rather than honoring what actually makes it so people can have genuine connection with you. That's a healthy dynamic. And so I think that as you're talking about these things of, it's not just sisterhood for sisterhood's sake to say, yeah, we're in this together, let's go. It's really genuine, generative connection that is creating. I mean, I could feel in the way you spoke about these dynamics with people, that one, somebody that you knew earlier in your life, and then somebody that you're creating what is so incredibly needed in this world right now, this like incredible work, because it not only works for you and the collaborator, but it also, that work then is so much more relevant and deep for people that are consuming it and getting a chance to interact with the kind of magic that you're putting out. So I'm amped with, I'm like selfishly like, yes, this year for you is going to be good for so many people too.
But you know, and then what you're also speaking to, like pinging me too, is that this notion, which is very related to like the things that you and I, before we started recording, were chatting about sacred commerce, right? And we were talking about how we all can feel that we need to evolve our own economy, whether we're the consumer or we're promoting something. Like commerce in general needs evolution, but there's something that's pinging me about the sisterhood piece that I think is very relevant here, because sisterhood is not just about me and other women, right? Me and other girlfriends. This is actually about community. This is, what does it mean for us to be in community care?
Yeah.
And community care as a value to business. Like, this is a little like, right, mind blowing, like, oh, what? I mean, yes and no. Like for some people, it's like, of course. And then for many of us, it's like, of course. And also, how do I practice that?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it's also, the stories we've been told are actually pitting those two things against one another: business and community, business success and community flourishing. In order for the community to be supported, that means that your business might not necessarily be able to be as traditionally profitable or successful. And really understanding that maybe it's not pitting things against each other, but understanding how they're all interwoven into the same fabric.
And how they can emerge, right? So if of course, if we look at like 1980s, 90s, we see that, oh, these two are opposite of each other. But the emergence that's come is that, no, actually, how do we allow for both things that are important, community care and profits? How do we allow for both of these things to be emergent and to be an experiment and an exploration? And we get to screw up along the ways. We get to like test things out and say, no, that's not how it works. Not unlike the conversations that we're having around sisterhood. We get to have boundaries and feel like, oh, you know what? This boundary is actually keeping me isolated, or this boundary is a healthy one. Okay. Yeah. Good to know. Right. Like all this exploration that I think we're having as individuals. And if we can allow that same exploration to also take part in business, and especially in corporate settings, I think like how potent that would be for for our wholeness.
You know, there is if that unlocking of a key for that, I just got overwhelmed by the thought of like what type of wave of humanity can come in if we remove the barriers that we have from keeping our work lives and our human lives separate, right? As you're talking about really this like new paradigm of thinking about our economy and thinking about how we transact with one another and what commerce actually means, I feel like, you know, Checkbox Other is about an other experience. What has, you know, as you're diving into this work around really how we see ourselves within a transactive culture, while also remaining connected to one another and keeping our humanity at the levels that are not being devalued. How, as you're doing this work, what kinds of things do you feel like are showing up for you personally that are like, ooh, maybe this is different than what we've been taught or told? Or, you know, as you're interacting with other people, how has the kind of feeling of I don't belong within this structure shown up?
Well, I'll tell you that the thing that's coming alive right now, as you're asking the question, was my partner and I had a photography business in Boston. And part of the model of this business was that we were really good marketers. And we saw this opportunity to employ other photojournalists when photojournalism was not like a hot thing in the wedding industry. How do we employ other photojournalists who can barely pay their rent with freelance newspaper jobs and pay, like I said, pay them really well, and that this could be like a scalable business. And I remember thinking, like, you know, just like any small business, like being at that, like you make that choice of like, we pay our people or we pay ourselves.
Right. Yeah,
Like we
yeah.
definitely had those moments, right? Like super hairy moments, you know, especially when you have little kids, you're like, ooh, are we making the wrong choice? But it always felt, and I don't know if this is right or wrong, like I don't know. I'm open to critique on this. But I remember thinking or feeling like we need to take care of our people. Like, we're not going to take care of our people to the point that we're starving and can't like feed our children, but they're just as important as we are. And we got, you know, just some critique of like, I mean, other photographers didn't want to do their business on their own because we were paying them so well. They were like, it's not even worth it. And that's like an example that's coming alive, that was, you know, both hairy and also like leading edge for us.
Yeah. It's interesting too, because I feel like the experience of immigrating to America, my father's immigrated here, and the understanding of the collective experience together. If you come to America and you're like, I feel like there is this indoctrination into individualist American dream. And when you're coming into America, not necessarily feeling as though you are American yet or seen as American, or, you know, as before we were recording, the what are you question or where do you come from question, which is automatically like, you don't belong here. Tell me more. I need to, you know, if you're coming into a space realizing like I'm one of many that are coming into here and we all are trying to eat, but also the food will not nourish us if other people aren't eating as well. Like there is this experience that, again, brings a bit of more of the universality versus, again, I think of that disbelief that it seemed to was coming through. People were like, why would I start my own business? You're paying me great. Or like other businesses being like, you know, that should be going in your pocket. What are you doing? It's just such an interesting thing because I feel like so often when we talk about supporting one another, it is at the expense of ourselves. Oftentimes, if our society is set up to then take care of the people that need support, then our society is not able to thrive, and the people that are working hard aren't getting paid for what they've got, rather than honoring and understanding that the contributions from people are valuable. They might be different, but they are still valuable. And so I think there is a part of this that like, again, all the messages that came to you and also the work that you do, it feels like it is constantly this experience of like, yeah, no, this is normal and natural, but also being like, there's dissonance from the outside world telling me it's not, but I'm pretty sure it is.
It's complicated, right? It really, really is, because I do remember those moments where, especially in the winter, we live in Boston, and wedding industry is very seasonal. Talk about the first principle. Right? It's very seasonal. And I remember being like, okay, if this is still going to be the model that we're after, if we're still going to, I didn't call it community care then, but I just knew that if we don't do this, we are just like every other business. Yeah. And although maybe at the time I thought, like people who were super successful, I needed to learn what they're learning on a practical level, I wasn't doing what I was learning in some of the books. And I can't really tell you why, because I didn't at that time. This was like over a decade. I mean, this was like 15 years ago now. I remember like, it just, I'm having a hard time articulating it, because I don't really know why we did what we did, but I just knew we wanted to do things differently. Yeah. We wanted to do things differently. And the invitation for all of us is like, what would it look like for us, coming back to like your whole thing of like boundaries, right? Like boundaries is, a lot of that has to do with like, how do I stay whole in this world that is not always treating me like I'm whole, or they're not always whole. Yeah. So boundaries is really important in that, like, I need this. And also if I like break open a tad, then I'll get to interact with someone else. And then maybe I close it back up again. And then maybe I open it a little more next time. Yeah. And it's similar to that, what happens in these emergent business practices, where we say, I'm going to explore this edge. Yeah. Yeah. Power shows up. It's different than you expect, though, it sounds like. I mean, you offer the invitation and get to witness how it plays out, rather than being like, well, this is the blueprint somebody else used. Even if it doesn't feel in alignment with me, I'm going to trust that something will show up to either guide me towards what other people are doing or continue on the path that I have. And so I feel like there's so much power in not only witnessing yourself do that, right, in your business, but witnessing the reaction and the experience that other people have being held in a container that is honoring their value. Totally. That is a really, really powerful thing. And I think, when I'm coaching people, I'm constantly talking about like, it's not just about like how you're showing up at work. The way that you're showing up in life is how you're showing up across the board. And so it's not just being really supportive for people in their work lives. They're able to then be more expansive in their lives. They're able to, that ripple effect is real. And it's really, really powerful, because it gives permission for so many other ways to kind of think outside the box, or even more so like act in alignment with your wisdom, right? Instead of, here's what I was taught to do. Because I think a huge part of how we're educated is about unlearning kind of that internal wisdom that we have, in order to say, this is the way. I was thinking about it like math problems. Maybe it's because I had like no patience for the fact that they always were like, you have to show your work the way I taught you. And I was like, I understand how you taught me. My brain does it this way. Would you like me to show you the work I did, or would you like me to do the work again through the lens with which you want me to show you how to solve this problem? Got to the right answer. Probably got to the right answer faster, right? Got the right answer faster for me, for sure. But so much of that process and that wrestling in school for me was being like, right, but
I don't understand why my process has to be your process. And so often that is how we have traditionally learned, is to be like, all right, here's the one path, the one right way. And here's, again, what leads us to robotic nature, right? Like, here is your programming, press play, press start at the beginning of the day and go through your motions and then end and go to bed. And so when you're actually allowing yourself to have more breadth and depth as a human, it is that trusting the kind of nudge to maybe do it a little bit different that maybe you've never seen before, or it might make you feel a little bit uncomfortable of like, am I going to be able to put food on the table in the same way I used to if I do this? And trusting that as those evidence elements start showing up, you don't have to be like, well, I did it, so I have to stay on this path. You can actually adapt and be more in the situation.
And part of why, I'm having this conversation with you and not saying like, well, this is how it needs to look, is that because it is so emergent, each of us get to have that experiment, right? So let me just tell you a little bit about, if you don't mind, telling you about like the ethos of sacred commerce.
Yes, please.
First is feel good, which is related to moon wisdom. Second is be wealthy, which is related to solar wisdom, sun wisdom. And then it's give back. So feel good, be wealthy, give back. And the give back has to do with earth wisdom. And
planting seeds like you talked about.
Yeah. And plant and ceremony and planting seeds and how am I being regenerative? How is my business being regenerative? How is my money? How's my earning? Like, never mind if you don't have your own business, like that's fine. But how is your money being regenerative? What you're earning? And then you can see how all three of those like feel like, well, they could have a lot of variables, right? Because feel good will look very different for you than for me. Be wealthy will be very different for you than for me. And then giving back is also something that gets to flow through my values and my lens.
And your experiences of who and how and where, right? Like, even if we have the same exact beliefs, the way and the exposure we have in life is going to be different. So those opportunities show up in different ways.
And we start, so when we're having this conversation, I can see how like some people may want to be like, but just tell me how, tell me the blueprint of how one gets to sacred commerce. That is the juiciness of this, is that there is no bro blueprint.
Yeah.
There is no bro blueprint. There is no Wall Street formula. There is a pushing of those boundaries, pushing of those ideals. That is what makes it alive. That's what makes it emergent. And that's what allows for us to have, commerce business that creates something else.
Yeah.
Than what we've experienced.
I don't know if I feel like you would have seen this, but this was something, as somebody that went to school for business, because as somebody that like really wanted to go into psychology and writing, went to school for business so that I could be independent, right? So I could take care of myself. And then went to a college that was focused on business, and then went into industries that were focused on not only businesses, but consulting and then private equity, building businesses within a model of here's the formula with which you do this. In the last month, maybe it was the last couple months, there's this trend of students stepping into MBA programs being like, can we talk about alternatives to the capitalistic structure? Can we talk about what capitalism could be if we remove some of the toxicity that we've spun far too far along the spectrum into like really being separate from our humanity? And I read that and I was like, that's that kind of just curiosity in itself, right? The article wasn't, and here's how you do it. It was, there is a call from within, right? It's the people that are saying, yeah, I applied to be here. I'm dropping a lot of money to be here. I'm using very important time of mine to be here. So all of the levers of value that we value in our society saying, right, but like, is there a better way for us to construct an economy that actually buoys us, is more supportive than what we have right now? Because what we're watching is cracks that were always there becoming chasms, becoming like earthquakes that showed up for a bunch of different reasons, and a lot of events that have kind of come together in a way that we're like, oh, this isn't sustainable. Oh, this isn't working for people. Oh, this is actually, really unhealthy for us as a culture. Our bodies are breaking down because we're working so hard. Like, so many different clues that are coming up, and the kind of just the freedom for the curiosity, and that curiosity isn't necessarily in the few, but in the many that are coming into spaces saying, I want to learn about business. I want to step into a successful business situation, but the way it's working isn't actually doing what it's, isn't providing me what it's selling it's providing me, right?
Yeah, there's no future to this.
Happiness is not what the other side of this model that we have right now. It might be zeros in your bank account, maybe, depending on who you are, what you look like, where your network is, and how much you're willing to shrink or play a part or put a mask on or wear a costume. But can we actually create business that is more generative, that can, yes, I can succeed, I can be fed, but also it won't be empty calories because no one else is getting fed. How can I make sure that other people are able to be supported? And it's not that we're constantly trying to, I mean, I think that we're constantly saying like, all right, we're going to take all of this. And then there are people that are hungry, that aren't getting any food. Okay, give it all. That it's this kind of back and forth of a pendulum that's like not healthy on either spectrum of give everything away or hold and withhold everything. Like, really creating it again, the emotion. It's funny, my body keeps having, because your emotional reaction to talking about planting seeds, of really this idea of how can we trust in the very literal sense of the metaphor, that the soil is fertile enough that if I plant a seed, it will grow. And if I tend the land, it will grow. And then those things that grow will actually have seeds that then allow for more creation. It's not, unfortunately, it's not, at least what I learned in business principles when I was going to school, or when I learned about, what consulting was all about, and private equity and investment management. Yeah, we want there to be money made, but it's not necessarily about the longevity. It might be, what's the return on the investment in the next 5 to 10 years? And instead it's like, okay, what is the return on the investment, not just financially, but holistically? How is our health? How are our systems? How is our community? But then also generationally, how are you building legacy in such a way that not only can we help future generations of humans, but how can we heal our planet? How can we do all these things that we can actually flourish, and not just in the zeros in our bank account?
Yeah. And, I can also feel people saying like, yeah, and, like, I only have so much. Right. And so I hear that, I understand that, and especially as, people are connecting to like, what is going to happen to the market? Right. What is going to happen to my money? There's this like kind of fear of what's about to happen, and why I keep, first, I think that we deserve to courageously exert ourselves towards something that's a little different, right? And maybe also we deserve to revisit values. And then we also like kind of deserve to say, well, this is what I have. What would happen if I practiced with this amount that I have now? I practiced it a little bit differently. And then what would happen if I plugged into the forest that is supporting me, which is this like entire existence, in that principle that we shared, your needs are soul wants are provided even before you need or want it. Embody this intention. What would our month budget look like if we were doing that responsibly? I get it, like responsibly, but it is an experiment and it is an exploration. And there is a possibility that we could win in more directions than just like in one direction.
with less exertion. I think there's the power of the fact that we're like, all right, we're hustling ourselves to burnout, but I don't have any energy left at the end of the day to like eat or to be around people in my life. And so it's like not just necessarily winning to get to the one goal, but how can I create a life that is sustaining itself instead of constantly feeling lack and fear around every corner when things outside of my control happen, because they will. It's really, really powerful to think about. Obviously we've had a very, very overt example of things being out of our control.
Yeah.
And for a long enough period of time that we've had to, and a lot of people in a lot of different ways, reflect on how we see ourselves in the world, how we interact with other people. And now the idea that we're reemerging in different ways, and Beyonce's Renaissance is what popped into my head of like, now we have a level of, you couldn't turn away from the reality that things weren't necessarily set up that worked. But how can I, even if I don't do all of, like you're saying, even if I don't do my entire bank account to play with, how can I have this particular amount set aside to really experiment? And think of it like, the sandbox that kids play in, or the water table that kids play in, of like, can I have a space where I can let that new possibility flow and live and breathe, and I can watch myself, one, doing it, but also two, existing in it. So being in it. How do those things not only stay within the confines of that sandbox or that water table? I say water table because I feel like all my friends with little kids, their kids are just splashing all over the place with water. And it's like, this is the safe place to be making this mess. But it's really, really fascinating to think about how, as we are given these opportunities, the willingness to step forward and understand that fear is showing up, but still be kind of emergent and focus on expansion and welcoming a little bit of what I always call it a wobble, like that you're going to stumble, you're going to fall, there's going to be missteps, and other people might need to lean on you and you might need to lean on them. And that's okay. That's kind of the human experience. It's not necessarily for us to just be straight line, I know what I want to do, and in 50 years is exactly where I plan to go. Really being able to exist in that time rather than just being focused on the mountaintop, really understanding what is it to make that voyage and that pilgrimage.
Yeah. And just as we are suggesting that on a humanity level, we can have community care. Like this concept is like not just about us as humans. It's also, I sort of mentioned earlier, it's like, can we like tap into that? There's a whole forest. There's a whole planet that's rooting for us.
Yeah.
That there really is this mystery that's rooting for us. And if we listen, if we like go into humble ceremony and re-indigenize ourselves, reroot ourselves, tap back into our traditions of our peoples, if we do that, there'll be this greater listening that we have, that the whole forest will be like, and now go here and now go there. Like we're not alone, even in our money making.
Yeah.
Like we're not alone even in our money making or our money earning, whatever you want to call it. We're not alone in that.
And there are forces nudging you in a whole bunch of different directions. It's funny because I feel like Mercury retrograde is something that has like gone into vernacular that's not necessarily in the spiritual realm. I think people are like, oh, well, stuff stopped working. I guess it was Mercury retrograde. It's become more normalized. But I feel like there has been such a kind of a separateness from the world around us in order to be in a culture that tends to extract in order to see success. And so this idea of being sustainable and being really not just like focused on green living, but really blue living, of like, building as you go, is really powerful. And the other thing, and this is something that really, I will watch every documentary about this and probably cry every time, but watching how our earth is set up to heal if we just leave it alone is something that, especially is the last couple of years, I think it's on Apple Plus or something. They have probably 90 minutes, not even, that's called, I think, The Year the Earth Stood Still or something like that. That shows It's video of how, as the humans got out of the way, because we were all in our homes, how the earth started and how nature started and how animal life, the animal kingdom of sorts started to like reintegrate themselves into what is the beautiful aspect of what our planet has the opportunity to be offering us. And so being able to to bear witness to the healing that the earth did in 6 months, and just the permission, if we just stop trying to over control and coerce, that it actually is in our favor, instead of, again, if we're operating in like such a fear-based approach, that we constantly think everything's a threat. But if we move out of the way and actually see things are trying to move in a generative direction and a healing direction, and in like a direction that can amplify, all the things that help us flourish, it's hard to then hold this fear-based operating procedure when you start seeing, oh, the world actually wants me to be successful. Oh, the world knows how to heal itself. I don't have to carry all the weight on my back. The wind is actually behind me, not against my face.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, so here's what I would love, as you, I sprinkled the word pilgrimage for a reason, as you know. So you are taking people and yourself on these amazing pilgrimages. Can you talk a little bit about what they are, and also like what was the origin point, and what has the experience been like as you are doing that reintegration process?
I think growing up in another country, I have always prioritized stepping outside of this United States paradigm and stepping off to see, what does food somewhere else, what is it like? How do people engage with each other? What's the art like? And what are the ways in which these peoples engage with the sacredness of the earth or the sacredness of their traditions?
Yeah.
Right. So, and in an era of not wanting to, be appropriating in someone else's culture, but still, like, we can go and appreciate and partake and receive, and also, like, how do I get to be a blessing? Like, how can I be a blessing on a country, on a whole infrastructure? That ceremonial walk, I'm feeling like it's like, to me, it's like the most unintimidating way to have us all place ourselves in this world. Like, we're about to go to Egypt, and Egypt is the perfect example, because Egypt is like, holy shit, like mega ancient, right? And you're just like, you go there and you're like, I don't even understand. Like, I don't even understand how these things stayed for thousands of years. And even as civilizations have come to try to conquer it, how they still couldn't destroy it all. Yeah. They tried, but it's impossible because it's so massive. Wow. And the walking of these temples, not from a place of so much like, what can I get from it? Because that's extractive. But when we enter into it from like, how can I be a blessing? How can I, everything that I do and say, and even as I'm going into this place, how can I shift that way? And the gifts on the other end are things that our minds cannot even begin to comprehend. I mean, it's like, of course I try to like, and in philosophically, people are like, oh yeah, I get that. Like, oh, okay. Yeah. I'm not just going there with my intentions. Right. I'm going there to be a blessing. And then I'm just so excited for this group of people, because as they walk this, and a constant daily reminder of, we are here to make offerings in the way that we can. And we are here to be a blessing. Expect nothing, like, sure, you will get something. And then at the end of it, what the mystery, how the mystery gifts us, I am excited for that.
So an episode that I think it will be the episode right before this, the interview right before this, is with a man named Nikki. And I did not know that the experience that I had with him was going to feel like a pilgrimage of sorts. But I went to Portugal for my cousin's wedding that had been rescheduled a couple of times because of COVID. And he leads this tour that's the African Tour of Lisbon. And there was so much power in walking on the ground where so many powerful generations had walked before. And powerful doesn't necessarily mean that they held the seat of power, but people and civilizations and history that went through so much to make it so the world is what it is now. And as you're saying, persevered through fires and earthquakes and all of that. And yes, the history that you're told on a walking tour, but also the history you're not told. Yeah. And the history that you'll never be told, but you can feel in your body, was such a powerful thing. There was a part of where he started, which is the square where the transatlantic trade was happening. It was the beacon for people that wanted to come participate. It was where the origination point was. And you stood there as he's talking about this, and you could feel all the people and the grief people were feeling, the loss and the kind of, but also you could feel the power of an entire group of people that went through so much pain and still created such an incredibly powerful culture of Black culture in Portugal. And so how you can learn those things in book and be told those things in stories, but to walk the ground where those things existed, those people existed, but the intangible things that come as human beings living in a space where there's challenges coming about, or there's destruction attempting to completely annihilate, and still it doesn't succeed, is something that is incredibly powerful. And again, if we're from the American point of view of pilgrimage, especially both of us having been in Massachusetts, it was all about the pilgrims finding Plymouth Rock, which is a very small rock for anybody that's actually gone and seen it. And that is what it is to be a pilgrim, to come and colonialize, right? But the idea of really going and witnessing not only, what has been and what has withstood, but how you can be part of a place that you have never been before. And how kind of, I kept feeling like this cathartic and healing part as you're talking about being in these spaces and being a blessing, and also witnessing the unseen. It sounds like it's what's happening. And when you're saying, all of these things we can plan for, but also at the end, when we look back, and there were so many gifts that came through and magic that came through that we never would have known if not for experiencing it.
Yeah. And especially with Egypt, but other places also, there is also the thing that I like to bring people into is a preparation, a organizing of their psyche and their soul, so that they can receive the mystery without the tumultuousness of the biblical experience. How sometimes, I don't know if you ever have, I'm sure you have, but you go to sign up for something, and it's leading up to this thing, it's going to be so transformative for you. And then all this stuff starts happening in your life, right? And you're like, I know this is the thing. But it does, to the way that I feel, and I'm not saying that I can control universal laws or anything like that. And I also feel that there is a surrender and also an ask that we can enter into with more benevolence, especially in these sacred lands. And the guide does matter.
Oh, yes.
The guide does matter.
Yeah.
because the consciousness of the guide, and I'm not necessarily, I mean, sure, I'm speaking for myself because I'm the human guide,
Yeah.
but like the you know, the goddess or the great mother that is guiding each of these pilgrimages is, there's a very specific relationship that we create with these guides.
So when you're talking about that kind of, I think for those of us that operate so deeply, I think of like heels dug into the, the plane that we're standing on. When you're talking about guides and you're talking about that kind of higher consciousness or those nudges, how do you think about how that, one, I guess, shapes the pilgrimages, but also how people can cultivate that relationship with something that might seem so distant from their current reality of, I guess the astral plane is the words that we use, but like, as you're having those experiences, I mean, it sounds like you're prepping people way before of just like being open and being receptive to that. And you might be a little afraid because it's new, but that's okay too. How do you kind of think about it? Because, for me personally, a lot of that was around reclaiming my relationship to not just becoming one version of a person. And so I think we were started talking about kind of femininity and the power of the feminine, and really the aspects of our lives that we drop off in order to be successful. How do you kind of create space for, or encourage people to occupy space for themselves that allows for those things to come in a way that's not like, pulling them in, but also is receptive? How do you kind of, if you have people that aren't necessarily there or are a little bit hesitant stepping into something new, like, I don't know, I know something big is about to come and I'm kind of already bracing for impact. How do you encourage people to kind of show up or be present in those moments?
I think it depends on the person, but in general, that's where I am.
Mm.
And so if somebody needs a hand to come to this place, awesome. I find that most people, it's like they catch it in the air. Yeah. You catch it in the air. I'll give you, like, because that can sound like so like out there, but I'll give you a really, really personal example. So we had, first, I just want to say, I want to speak to something that you said. You said, like, you spoke about my year in such a favorable way. And what you don't know is that there are some hard things that I'm also navigating, right? Of course, like, we're human, right? There are really like some really like tough betrayals in sisterhood that I'm like contending with. And my youngest daughter was she's okay, and she had a car accident and she is totaled her car, and she is somebody who's a little stubborn too, right? Like and so, like, being in relationship with especially a teenager, right, when they're trying to like be themselves, and you're like, I got some answers, and they're like, no,
I don't want your answers. I've got my own answers.
right?
Yeah.
And so, like, all those things. And what my partner and I did is that it's the I mean, I think I have to speak to this, but like, why she got into the accidents, because she was trying to avoid hitting an animal, and a tree stopped her. And so my partner and I went and made offerings at the tree. And I had like my drum, and I was just like, I don't know, I just was like speaking to all of existence, the forest. I was speaking to the forest and everything that's alive in the forest. And then I went and like spoke directly to the tree, and I hugged the tree, and all that like out there stuff. And I made the offerings, and I thought, that's what I can do. I can prep the field so that we as parents move through our trauma, and our feelings, and our like, and also our inability, right, to be able to like give her the answers because she doesn't want our answers.
Yeah.
Right. So the only thing that I can do is just prep the field and be like, I'm over here. I'm over here in peace, and I'm over here. And also knowing that there's a whole forest that's supporting you. And oh my God, let's give thanks to that tree that stopped you instead of like, and that fucking tree. Right. No, it's like that tree and that animal. And I don't know why that animal wanted you to stop and not keep going. I don't know the mystery of that, but I know that I can prep the field. Yeah. And then when I prep the field, her own evolution, her own answers can be just a little bit more available, even if she's not willing to go to the chiropractor, even if she's not willing to like whatever. Yeah. I can do that. And the same way, I can't take responsibility for these people that are coming on pilgrimage with me. I mean, I can do my part in saying like, okay, let's make sure that it's the appropriate people that are coming on this pilgrimage, because it matters who we go with, right? It matters who our community is. But I can't, that's not what I have sovereignty and autonomy over, right? Like they have their own, but what I can do is my stuff. I can be here. I can be in this, like I'm in listening, and I'm in ceremony, and I'm in giving, and I'm in sweetness, and I'm in alignment of my body, my psyche, my animal, and my soul. That's where I'm at. And like, you get to like partake of that, of this banquet that I'm putting before you, or not.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think there is such a power in witnessing, right? Like, I think there's a part of all that you are expressing in one, I think people listening to this right now, getting to hear how you process that experience that was an extremely, and is still, I'm sure, still extremely traumatic to be thinking about all the different elements. But also, I think this ties back to when you were saying there is so much in your favor. There is so much going on that's actually that wind behind your back and nudging you along and honoring and acknowledging that, versus getting stuck in the fuck you tree, right? Like that energy is the thing that seems to be the reflex response that we've been programmed to operate within, and then buy something to soothe it. Rather than cultivate this relationship that actually is welcoming and is easeful and allows for, I think there's this element of trust again that seems to just keep coming back around. But I think the beauty of you walking the walk in the view of other people to witness then welcomes them. You're talking about your daughter. She can step in her journey knowing that this is a path to take. Might not take every step that you took, but realizing, oh, okay, there's a different way to think about this than there being one way that makes me feel like I'm either good or bad, or I've forgotten something or lost something, or I'm not enough. Or there's something else I need to be or do or look like in order to be able to be welcome in this space. And so I think there is such a power in the presence that you have, but also in the presence. And it's funny, Elizabeth Zialto, when we were working together, one of the things she said to me was, I have a tendency to, she used the metaphor of like, you're on a boat and I have a tendency to lean too far to try to pull people out of the boat. So then I get thrown into the water and we're both drowning. And instead really having that presence of, I'm sure-footed, I am balanced, and yet I'm still willing to extend an arm. Come to my arm, it's ready for you, but I'm not willing to necessarily, to again, forego my boundaries to become, in the fuck you tree energy in order to be supportive. But I'm here. You are more than welcome to join me. The feast is here. But in order to get to the feast, there are some aspects that you need to be willing to step into for yourself. And it might not be the exact same way I do it, but giving yourself the permission to kind of believe. I think that the other part, and this is one of the things I've been thinking a lot about as I, step into a new city and think about like, I want to be meeting new people and I want to be dating, right? And a big part of me trying to figure out like, how do I want to show up in the world is figuring out like, how do I get to exist as Nikki fully? Like, how am I shining in a way that's not overshining to compensate for somebody else, or undershining to again compensate for somebody else's feelings in another way? but a huge emotion for me is awe and belief. I don't necessarily understand all the inner workings of why that animal stopped there or why that tree was there, but I can believe and be in awe of how everything played out and believe that there is some sort of force that's here to help bolster me. I don't need to know the inner workings of it, which again, I think your background in molecular biology and in business, right? It's like a lot of that is, let's find the root cause. Let's find the reason. Let's find how things are made. And to have that level of belief is something that isn't necessarily always the centering point. It's really, how do we pull it apart to find what's there? And it's such an interesting thing to be able to understand there are components of what's there, but I don't need to know everything in order to participate with it. I don't need to be the expert or have the answer before I even start to interact with the problem or the challenge.
Yeah. And there's a way to be both connected to the mystery and in presence, and then also very practical. Right?
Yeah.
Like those two things get to exist, right?
And they're not polar opposites either, right? I think that
no.
oftentimes it's like people think they're playing against each other. It's like, no, they're options. They're options on your platter. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a both, really.
Yeah.
Because I just want to just say, like, I am such a practical person. And maybe it's we're old souls and we can't the practicality, the material plane is just like, it's beautiful and it's amazing, and also like we can feel that it's not the everything.
Yeah.
So then what is that other thing?
I don't know if this happens for you, I'm trying to acknowledge when it, or maybe when I gave myself permission to really be like, oh yeah, there's something else out there. But I feel like when you experience grief and death and loss in a way where you have such a strong tie to a person that's no longer here in the material way, that there is this, I mean, some people do not have this experience, but there is this, for me personally, I feel the people that are no longer here all the time. And so it's really, really challenging for me to rectify that feeling and knowing with, I can't see you.
Yeah.
You're not knocking on my door and walking in, how those two things can both occupy the same space. Because again, if I've been taught in such a very literal, tangible way, the intangibles might not even have language or permission to show up, especially when there's heightened moments of stress or fear. Oftentimes the reflexes don't necessarily allow for that nuance, but the more, I think that more kind of witnessing, again, with yourself and other people, the more it becomes part of the fabric of how you operate, rather than, oh, that's nice when I have time, or nice when I feel safe enough.
The piece that's coming in as you're speaking is, you said language. And for me, and what I've seen in people that are in my communities or in the communities that we cultivate, is that when we enter into ceremonial space, we get to begin to decipher what is the language that we have with the unseen realm, right? Because each of us have a different language. There may be similarities, right? Like there may be like, oh, a feather, right? Like we all kind of can feel that, but we each have our own language. And the beauty of especially these pilgrimages, when we allow, I mean, to me, it's like I can go to New York City and have a pilgrimage. It's just like how I'm wired, because I'm like connected to my language, right? I'm connected to my language of the beyond that also gets to hang out and play in this realm. And there is something so fun to say, I am going to just go and explore my soul language. I'm going to go, and that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to leave the kids behind, and the husband behind, and the mom and the dad and everyone else in the work. And I'm going to leave everything behind, and I'm going to go and just show up for my soul language.
Power. I mean, that's again, leaving behind is its own permission granting for the people around you that you're, because leaving behind and you're coming back and you're doing right. But it's because there's so many things that are coming up. I'm like, we're told not to do any of that, but really it's the best permission you can give yourself and the other people around you. Okay. The one last thing I want to like nerd out about a little bit is you talked about your book with AC Brown and Soul Map, you called it, right? I want to make sure I got the name that you said. Doesn't matter. The book that you're doing that's about human design. For those of you that have listened to podcast episodes before, you know I nerd out on human design a lot. And one of the biggest things that you were just talking about, right, is it like your soul's language and your kind of energetic map, the way that you're intended to kind of operate with the world and interact with the world and interact with yourself and the things that light you up and all the kind of nudges and invitations that show up. I'd love to hear a little bit about how, as you're doing this work or as you're creating this incredible work that I can't wait to read, it's giving an invitation for people to really get a sense of that soul language, the way that, because I think, again, a lot of times when people are starting to step into this, like, how did somebody else do it before? And so much of the power is really understanding, yes, maybe this is how people did it before, but this is how your body, your soul interacts with the things happening in and around you. So if you wouldn't mind talking just a little bit about of the work that you're doing there and talk a little bit about, I can't wait. Don't worry. I will make sure I shout from the rooftops when it's ready.
Thank you.
I'd love to hear a little bit more about it.
We're very, very excited about it. You know, I've been with human design for 17 years because my oldest daughter's a reflector, and I was very close to that time of that whole story that I told you. Yeah. Probably 3 years before that whole story of the priestess code principles coming to me. Somebody said, have you tried human design? And I was like, no, but bring it, like I'm desperate here. And since then, human design, what I really received from it is like, it was very practical. It was a very practical lens for me to explore myself, like my own authenticity, and then also explore these like little kids, 3 and newborn, and how to parent them according to their way, their soul map. And then in my marriage, and then in my career, right? So it all kind of began in that. And what I started noticing is, especially since I started doing my own decolonizing work, is that I started noticing that here was this like synthesis of a tool that has astrology, Vedic astrology, the I Ching, the chakra system, the Hindu chakra system, quantum mechanics, the Judaic Kabbalah, and all these beautiful cultural ancient traditions, but we were beginning to kind of erase them in human design, right? And even I was getting that feedback of like, well, Asha, remember, this human design is one whole thing. Excuse me. It's not the parts. And I was like, actually, I think that when we erase the roots of the parts, we are going to miss out. And what I have seen, and, I don't pay a ton of attention of what happens in the human design community, but what I do know is that people come and say, I got this reading and somebody said this and this. And, as a person of color, like that was really harmful that they said this thing. And I think I think there's a training component to like why, because people haven't had a strong foundation in the I Ching. Like before I even got into human design, I was already studying the I Ching. It just so happened that I think I was already a feng shui consultant, and I had this teacher, and the chakra system, it's not just about the chakras as they call them, it's chakras. And it's not just their names and their breathing practices and all of that. There's an entire teaching, foundational teaching with them. And if we're just going to talk about their colors, then we are missing the richness of what they actually offer. So there was like that piece.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of why I wanted to partner with AC was that what I was seeing was that in the human design space, there wasn't always a ton of space for BIPOC, for Black, Indigenous people of color. There wasn't, there was this like blanket statement around conditioning as if like, you know, an immigrant, Desi, Latina, queer immigrant has the same conditioning as somebody who has generational wealth and is white. And I don't know, like, yeah, like, how are we the same? Like, that's not a thing. Like, do I believe in people's power, and do I believe in people's agency to create beauty and exuberance and flourishing and radiance? Yes, I do. But ignoring the rules of this material plane just seems like really just like not honoring our walks, right? Like it's just not honoring our walks. And so AC, as a Black woman, can really like share that from that her lived experience and how she, you know, has also, and both of us, but she, I think, takes like leadership here. You know, the leadership that she has in this this collaboration is to speak to that, to Black liberation. And for me, you know, the part that I am like, I feel like it's coherent for me to be ushering is the re-indigenizing of the parts, and just really of just beginning to plant the seeds of like, how do we re-indigenize the parts? Because it's not appropriate for me to say like, I'm going to evolve the I Ching. Like, no, that's for the lineage holders of that philosophy, of that religion, of that culture. But we got to start somewhere of just planting the seed, so we have like a little bit broader scope and understanding of where this thing comes from. And it's not, and yeah, we have to speak to that.
I am so excited because a friend and former guest, Courtney Napier, and I have actually had conversations about how we wish there was more space in the human design conversation for not just centering the white perspective, or at least white practitioners. Tends to be, you know, there just tends to be a very, very obvious disconnect in a level of diversity as we're talking about all the different experiences and ways people show up, and each chart being uniquely different. The way and the faces and the voices that have been talking about these things, there's a lot of similarity and through line. And then I think what you're talking about, and I'm fascinated by human design because of the fact that there's all those wisdom languages and backgrounds and things that I know I don't know, but that are bolstering and creating, and that it's not some person, like it's not, I shouldn't say this, well, like Scientology, at least what I've seen about Scientology, I haven't done deep work on it, but the documentaries, it was like a guy being like, I came up with this thing here, right? And yes, that is part of, but this is like ancient wisdom from, you know, a whole bunch of different places coming together with levels of wisdom that intersect. And to me personally, I was like, I can value so much of the learning that has come from not just the one person telling me it, but there's so much that comes from the roots that have been planted and you know, are really secure in so much wisdom that civilizations over time have come through. And so there is really so much power in understanding that without that rooting, there is that kind of like you've disconnected from, and it's kind of like a floating head. And so there is a little bit of that detachment feeling, which also feels like, I don't know why, it feels like the kind of 90s colorblind culture.
Totally.
Like, let's talk about things, but like let's keep it separate. And like everybody fits here, but we're only going to actually show it through a lens where certain people will actually be fully seen. And so I think there is, and again, a big part of that isn't like one individual person is a bad guy. It's that if we're operating without that understanding, we're going to be inadvertently missing parts. We're going to be leaving people behind or creating harm that's not intended, but it is very much happening over and over again. And so I saw that you came out with this book in one of AC's podcast episodes, and I sent it to Courtney and I was like, look at this. So excited for this.
Thank you.
I feel like it is going to be such a gift out in the world, but also I think just the permission to have the conversation and have language and words and resources to be able to further the conversation around how we need to build a deeper understanding of this stuff is just beautiful. I'm so excited for this. And I just hope those of you that are listening, get to know more about the work that you're doing. If they're thinking about going on a pilgrimage, get on there. But I would love to hear how people can kind of connect with you and further their journey. If this stuff, it feels like, I mean, we talked about so many things today, that there's stuff that feels like it's activated within them to kind of come closer to your work and how you're showing up and the blessings that you're bringing to the world.
Thank you. The one, we didn't talk about this, but it's kind of like inherent in the book that I wrote, The Priestess Code, is that priestess soul archetype is really what has always guided me. Mm-hmm. And so one of a way that people can feel can kind of like orient their lives or their vocation is I have a workbook. It's called the Dharma Types, and people can find it ashaisnow.com/Dharma, DHARMA. And then they can kind of be in that curiosity and exploration of what is their soul archetype. So that I would say, like, number one, go and do that, because being a priestess felt foreign to my molecular biologist mind, but I was deeply intrigued by it. I was like, I don't know what that is, but I want more, and it has really been that North Star for me. Yeah. And there's many, like, we all have different soul archetypes, but that one has been like my primary one. So I would definitely invite people there. And if people are but if they also want to connect on social media, Instagram is probably my favorite. So Asha is now there also.
And these will all be in show notes too. So if you're on like driving or something, you can go there and we'll put the links. Asha, I am just so grateful that our paths connected for today. And as I said, this year of yours, I am just so grateful for it, because I feel like you just dropped so many nuggets on me just today alone that are going to help to kind of plant seeds in different parts of my life. And I know from our audience too. So that ripple effect is real. So thank you so much for joining.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Thank you for opening up the conversation. And also for the space that you have cultivated. Feels like to me that I could show up in my full self. I could show up and say, hey, thank you for seeing that my year is amazing. And what you don't know is that there's other things, and that can also be a part of this realness that we're here in the conversation. Other people get to also witness, like, wow, she overcame all that sisterhood stuff. She's in these amazing partnerships, and all those things amazing. And there's also like shit that happens in the background, right? Like all those things can be happening simultaneously.
Yes, it's so like little kids finger painting. Like, it's a beautiful end product, but there's paint everywhere. And that's yeah.
And I just want to say thank you for cultivating that space, because that's important. And it's kind of what we're talking about, right? Like, if we're going to do business differently, and we're going to allow people to be in their full human selves, what can we do? We can't change every business, but we can cultivate the spaces that we have, like, that you got permission to cultivate.
Yeah. Well, I just need to say thank you for acknowledging that, because it does, I think that space creation and cultivation, which is everything we just talked about is what you're doing as well, is that thing that I feel like so many people don't feel like they have the power to do, and they very much do. How they show up in community with people, in interactions with one other person, in interactions with themselves in the mirror. There is so much potential to be creating that. So I'm so grateful that you saw that here and felt that here, because that's the goal, to hold space for people to be fully human beings, because that's what we all are. So thank you so much for joining, and everybody go get the books, and I will let you know when Soul Map comes out, because I'm amped about it.
Thank you.
I told you that conversation was so wonderful. We could have gone for hours, because Asha has so much wisdom and brought so much just realness, right? Like, I mean, there was so much there that I feel like all of us could relate to. And I hope that some of you might now be willing to dive into some of the magic that comes after. Maybe you have some shower thoughts or shower ideas that come in. You never know what kind of wisdom will come forward in those moments where you're not necessarily expecting. I hope you feel at the end of this that you are full of so much wisdom and so much value, and your way of operating is uniquely yours. And it is beautiful to understand how you best operate in the world and really embrace that. And also to be part of what Asha referenced so many times as community care, to be connected with the community and the village around you, and to give yourself permission to kind of work through the messy parts and allow for both the messy parts to exist as you are succeeding in your life, and as you need to reach out a hand and ask for some support. You are not alone. And I can't wait to see you on the next episode.